Now then, helping people with their energy bills and rising food costs will not add to inflation. That's according to one of the UK's most prominent business leaders. Tony Danker, who's head of the Confederation of British Industry, spoke after the Chancellor Rishi Sunak promised tax cuts for businesses if they invest more to try to boost the UK's economy. So, should the government be doing more to help workers and families with the cost of living crisis? Well, in a moment, I'm going to be joined by a personal finance expert and an economist to talk about the future of this crisis and how to deal with it, plus several people really feeling the squeeze on their incomes. But first, the rising cost of gas and electricity has, of course, left some families forced to choose between heating and eating. And for some, switching off could be the difference between life and death, quite literally. Katerina Vitozzi reports.
Open the curtains.
So
show them where your oxygen is.
When Alex was born, his mum was told he wouldn't live beyond a week. He is now a thriving 16-year-old, but needs near constant support. At night, an oxygen machine keeps him alive. During the day, a pump provides vital food, water and medicine.
Just let me swap your feed round, please, first.
Everything is run off batteries and mains power. Bills just go up and up.
I would probably say an extra £300 a month, just in household bills and things. For Alex, it's a case of life and death, obviously, because he's on his oxygen machine overnight. So if we couldn't literally afford to pay those bills, then I don't know what would happen.
This is the stark situation faced by families with sick and disabled children at home. As energy prices rise, they simply can't unplug.
It worries me for the future as to if things do get worse, how will it affect us as a family? What do we do, kind of thing? Because it's all very well and good somebody coming and saying, go and get an extra job or do this and do that, but Alex alone is a full-time job. I feel like it's a constant battle with a child with a disability, and it never stops.
A battle in what sense?
Sorry.
That's okay. It's incredibly hard.
Sorry.
Much needed respite comes from here. This centre was set up by Emma and other local parents. It's been entirely built and funded by the community.
It's support at the end of the day, and there's not much of it around, at the minute.
it doesn't do me any good staying in the house and
No.
being with you all the time.
No.
Even though I do love you very much, it's still not going to do me any good.
These children and their families dearly need this help. They worry as prices rise and budgets tighten, it will become harder to find.
Do you have any questions? Come behind the DJ booth.
Katerina Vitozzi, Sky News in Wigan.
Well, let's discuss the overall cost of living crisis now, what might be done about it. Here in the studio with me is Laura Suter, Head of Personal Finance with AJ Bell, and Shreya Nanda, an economist at the Institute for Public Policy Research Centre for Economic Justice, who's also worked for the Government Economic Service. Welcome to you all. We're also joined this evening by, throughout the programme, we'll be talking to Michael Atwell-Bryce, who is a foster parent and full-time carer to 15-year-old twin boys with his partner Paul, and from South London. We're joined by Carly Newman, who is a single mother on universal credit. Very good evening to you all. And Michael, let's hear from you first of all about a bit about your life and the fostering and the young teenagers that you're looking after, and some of these pressures. And I suspect, of course, as for so many millions of people, energy and food loom large.
Yeah, definitely. So we used to spend about £130 a month on energy, and we're being told by his energy provider now it's going to be £5,000, just under £5,000 for a year. So that's gone up massively. Obviously, there's two older twins, Levi and Lucas. They're disabled. We go to the hospital a lot with them. fuel in the van's gone from like £80 to £120 a week. It's just skyrocketing, like beyond being able to manage it. It's just getting so expensive where we're going to have to cut back on other things.
And what about the boys? They, teenage boys, well, we know how often they raid the fridge.
Oh, yeah, I mean, we've got 5 children altogether, so we've got 4 boys of his own that we've adopted, 2 sets of twins, and then we've got a foster child as well who's 15, and they're always obviously hungry, wanting feeding, but it's mainly the energy and the fuel more than the food to us, because those older boys have got life-threatening epilepsy, and they've also got autism, so a lot of their stuff's electric, the beds are plugged in, they've got special equipment, sensory equipment, which is all run off electric. So it's that worries us the most.
And so, I mean, obviously, the specialist equipment really burns up the electricity as well. Do you get any specific help for that?
No, so obviously, like everybody else, we've just had the £150 rebate off the council tax because we're in that certain band. But to go from like £1,500 a year for gas and electric to 5,000, and obviously that's not going to even touch the sides. It's not even going to make a dent in it. So,
yeah.
I mean, we can't. And then if it's going to go up again in October, it's like their epilepsy alarms are plugged in, the beds are plugged into electric, sensory equipment is, the bath's like a hydrotherapy bath. They've got an electric changing bench. We've got like a through-floor lift to take us from ground to first floor if they have bad seizures. So everything's run off that. We can't turn none of that off. We can't stop using none of that type of stuff. It's not like just turning the lights off. It's stuff that they really need for their medical needs.
Definitely is. Michael, I'm going to put some of those concerns then to our experts. And Carly, well, I know you're nodding along there. Many of the same concerns there about energy prices. But Laura, I mean, what can be done? Is Michael saying there, right, so we've got this help announced in the spring statement to deal, the government thinks, with the situation as it is now on energy, but prices are just going up, and it may last months, years.
I think when the government first announced that bit of support in the form of the council tax rebate, but also the £200 energy loan scheme that's coming in later this year, they were basing it on the energy price spike being temporary and also on the price rises that we saw already this year. What we're now looking at is October. There's going to be another increase, with some people expecting that average household bills are going to go up to around £2,600 a year. Now, obviously, that's an average family. If you've got more people in your household or if you've got particular needs, then your energy costs are going to be far higher. And I think we're now at the point where the government can't do nothing anymore. There are so many families and households out there that are struggling that I think the weight of public opinion is such that they will have to do something. And before October, I think what we've heard so far...
Because that's when a new price cap will be set.
Yeah, so October is when the nation will see their energy prices rise again. I think it's almost impossible now for the government to wait until October. We've heard this commentary from Rishi Sunak saying he stands ready. I think at this point the nation is saying we need you to not just be ready but do something.
Shreya, give us the overview though on energy. Is it necessarily going to continue to rise? Because, you know, we know about the war in Ukraine and the effect that that's having on gas supplies in particular to Europe, yet we hear the government and all governments talking about diversification, getting away, particularly from these carbon fuels, but that presumably is going to take years and may not necessarily be cheaper.
Yeah, I think that's right. When we look at the global situation, yes, it's the stuff that's happening in Ukraine, but we also see cascade effects in energy and food markets around the world. So what's happening in India with wheat exports, what's happening in Sri Lanka with their food situation. So it's possible that the problem could get worse. And then in terms of what the government's doing to diversify energy supplies, obviously that's really necessary. But I think what we've seen as a response from the sector is that that's not going far enough, and they really need to be throwing the kitchen sink at this and putting everything into increasing supply so that we can get through the winter without seeing a catastrophe.
Yeah, but just this winter and maybe next winter. Michael, just come back on us, because, of course, being floated around here, and it's one of Labour's main policies, is a windfall tax on these energy companies. Because of the soaring price of all their fuels, they're making these huge profits, billions upon billions. Would you like to see them hand some of it over to help out people like you?
Definitely. I don't understand why companies can make millions and millions of pounds and then
billions,
obviously put that on yeah, billions of pounds and put it on to families like us. I know like lots of families get in touch with us because we do a podcast about disabilities as well. And you get in touch with different people with special needs and stuff. And they're all struggling. They're having to turn sensory equipment off. They're trying to cut back on going out on trips to the parks with the children in the like, we've got a special WAV. So it's a wheelchair accessible van. And that takes a lot of fuel to fill. So it's children like Levi and Lucas, disabled children, that are going to be losing out the most because it's the carers that are at home a lot. So it just costs a lot more to do it.
Yeah, it certainly does. Shreya, what about a windfall tax then? I mean, clearly the energy companies can afford it. It's happened to them before. You say the government's got to throw the kitchen sink at it. Surely, well, this is at least part of it. This is a couple of taps or something.
Yeah, I completely agree. We should be looking at measures like a windfall tax. As you say, energy companies are making huge profits. And if we think back to when companies like British Gas were privatised, there weren't the provisions put in place to deal with a situation like this where we see massive profits but really high energy bills for consumers. And that's something that should have been done then and needs to be done now.
But Laura, the argument is, OK, even if you do it, it may not be enough. It's a one-off. You can't keep doing it. You will deter investment. And of course, I know that there is an effect on people's pension funds. And a lot of people don't know that they're invested and get huge amounts of money from these companies. If they're paying windfall taxes, then there's less in dividends going to those pensioners. But will it be enough? Or will it just symbolise something?
I think partly it's that symbolic thing of the nation being quite angry that these companies are making so much money and they feel like they're taking the money out of their back pockets and making profits directly from that. So I think it's partly the weight of public opinion. It will help, obviously, it will raise money. We don't know exactly how much until the government commits to it and says how much what that exact windfall tax would be. We don't know how much it would raise, but it would go some way to helping people. It would then depend how the government used that money. If they were to funnel it to the lowest income families and those most in need, then obviously the amount per head that you would get would be much higher. If they handed out a slightly broader measure like the council tax rebate, where lots of people got that, I mean, I got that, and I'm certainly not in a low income family,
well,
so
it's not targeted
enough. And so if it went to that and went to more households, then the actual amount that you'd get per household wouldn't be as much.
And this 200 quid is, I mean, it's a loan ultimately. It's going to come off your bills in the future.
Exactly. So it's a loan that you pay back at a rate of £50 a year. Now, obviously, that loan might help some people to get through winter, and it's a no-interest loan, so it's much better than people who would otherwise be putting that on high-cost debt. But it's not a handout. It's the government lending you a bit of money for a bit of time. You're still paying it back.
Certainly not the kitchen sink. Let's hear from Carly. Carly, welcome to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, you are a single parent, so what we'd like to hear is, I suppose, you know, your household balance sheet, just simply your income versus your expenditure, how they're diverging, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess for me, there's obviously we've been talking about energy and food, but I live in London, so I have very high rent costs and very high childcare costs to balance as well. And you know, I've always had them, so it feels like the cost of living crisis isn't in isolation of very high costs that I've already been sort of seeing. So I work in a fairly senior role, upper management, but I do still rely on universal credit in order to be able to meet those costs, particularly around rent and childcare. And I work slightly less hours in order to sort of practically manage my childcare, but also financially because it's so expensive. And that's where the sort of like shortfall comes, and I rely on universal credit. But obviously, as we know, universal credit hasn't risen in line with inflation. So, yeah.
Yeah, so basically, right, energy we know about, rent gone up, and clearly food. You know, where are the stresses and strains in the budget for you?
Yeah, as we were talking about before, energy, definitely. My energy bills at the moment are the same price as they were in like winter last year. So I normally see a decrease by about 50% in the summer or the warmer months. I'm not seeing those now. They're the same price as winter. And yeah, food, like shopping, just general living is just becoming more and more expensive and more unaffordable. And it just feels like where do we get to live? So we're working more, we're being told to work more and work harder to be able to manage that, but we can't do anything because it's so unaffordable.
Yeah, work more or get a better job. How easy is that? Just tell us, though, you don't have to give us the numbers, just the proportions then between your income from work and your income from universal credit.
You mean versus my
just
outcomes?
Just the proportions. What is it? 2/3 from work and a top up from universal credit of about 1/3. Is it kind of like that?
Yes. Yeah. It's about.
Okay.
Yeah. That is about right. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Let's talk then to Laura and Shreya. And Laura, first of all, I mean, universal credit. You were talking earlier about how targeted benefits can be. I mean, and the one thing that the government took away post-pandemic was this £20 uplift on universal credit. Surely if they just left that alone, many people like Carly wouldn't be in this situation.
Yeah, so we've had the fact that they took that away, and also, as Carly alluded to there, the fact that the benefits haven't increased by the current rate of inflation. So they increased by a previous inflation figure that now looks very out of date in comparison to the price rises that we're seeing. So if you think about that in terms of a pay rise, people haven't had a pay rise to keep up with the rising cost of living. And so that means they have not enough money to meet those bills or less money.
So is there a case for, just tell me how the timetable works. Off the top of my head, so we get the inflation numbers from September, which then are applied to benefits and pensions in the subsequent April. That's a long time to work.
Yeah.
What about if they just did it, you get the numbers, is September the right month, you get the inflation numbers then, and then just do it in October, just give people the 9 or 10%, whatever inflation is by then?
Yeah, there's just, exactly as you say, there's a big time lag between the inflation figure they take and when it actually comes in. Now, there's been a lot of talk this week about the archaic government systems and the fact that they need that time period to bake in those increases, put them into their systems. But it feels slightly mad that in the current times that we're in, that it would take so long for them to update that. And that's also part of the argument that the Chancellor is putting forward for not having a kind of mid-year increase in those benefits. That's something that's been suggested, is bringing forward next year's increase in benefits so people benefit now. But he blames outdated systems for not being able to do that.
Well, or perhaps lack of cash, which is what I want to put to you, Shreya. Two big picture questions. First of all, the outlook for inflation. Wouldn't it be great if some of the Bank of England's predictions from last year, that it's transitory, did come to pass? It looks like it's pretty baked in at the moment and still going up.
Yeah, I mean, the Bank of England has said that they think that 80% of inflation is to do with energy and food price shocks. So that's like supply side shocks from things like the Ukraine crisis. So that is on the transitory side rather than the idea that the economy is overheating due to high demand. But they are expecting inflation to stay high for most of the rest of this year. So there is a real need for the government to do more to make sure that ordinary people aren't having to choose between heating and eating, as you said earlier.
And what about the issue of can the government afford it? I mean, huge amounts, hundreds of billions spent on lockdowns and supporting businesses and individuals during the pandemic. Presumably they can only go so far if this is a cost of living crisis for years to come. Does there come a point when the government can't afford it, when we as a nation can't afford it?
Well, on the one hand, there is that, as you say, high spending during the COVID pandemic. But then on the other hand, there's things like the record energy company profits that we've seen, the huge gains that asset owners have made during the pandemic. They've seen their wealth go up enormously. So we do need to consider both of those things when we think about what the government can afford. And then if we look over the last 10 years, we've seen, a pretty stagnant economy, huge amounts of unprecedented monetary policy action to keep the economy just where it is. So I think the way of thinking where we're like, oh, the government can't afford to do this, it can't afford to do that, we need to rethink that.
Yeah, but then the really big picture question, this is global, isn't it? It's caused by a multitude of factors. We've got war, we've got lockdowns in China, we've got raging inflation in the United States, so many other problems. It doesn't look like it's going to end anytime soon.
Yes, it's to do with global factors, but then how we respond to that is within our gift. Like France has enough domestic energy capacity to meet its needs, and therefore it was able to take much stronger action than we were on making sure that consumer prices stayed low. So what we need to do is make that investment in things like nuclear power, solar power, wind power, retrofitting, gas reservoir capacity, so that when the next crisis comes, we can do that as well.
When the next crisis comes, but we're in one now. Let's get back to Carly. Carly, just tell us a little bit, though, about family life. You talked about rent there. You're in London. You're from London. Your child's from London. I suspect you've got, friends and relatives nearby. Could economic factors force you out?
Everyone asks me this. I won't leave London because my parents live in London, all my friends. As a single parent, it's kind of essential to me that I am near them. And I think that's sort of more important for me and my son. So I won't leave London, but it does become harder and harder to live here, for sure.
OK, and you've got a specific question, haven't you, for our panellists, Carly?
Well, I had a few, but you did
go on,
ask.
Go on, give us your main one.
I guess my main question would be around, I think, the fact that so far it's felt like the government's response has very much been about blaming and trying to get us as individuals to take responsibility without them taking any responsibility themselves. And the things that they're suggesting feel very unfair and unrealistic. So what could and should the government be doing? What could we be asking them and lobbying them to do more of, I guess, specifically, because it feels like the sort of blame and expectation is all on us as individuals, and that feels very unfair and unrealistic.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, Carly. Thank you for putting it. I mean, Laura, what do you make of that? Do you think that the government is trying to, point at the public, point at the individuals and say, you can work harder or you can get a better job and not doing enough itself?
I think it's a fair criticism. I think at the start of this, when I think the government thought this might be more transitory, to use that terrible phrase, they thought that if they put more on individuals to cut your energy usage, make your home more energy efficient, cut your food shop, then we might get through this period. Now it's obviously a much longer period. It's not transitory. And so I think then it's on us to push that back onto the government and see what they could do. And so many great suggestions have been put out by great experts like Shreya and other people in terms of what the government could do, the costings of that. They're not short of ideas. I think it's for them working out what they can afford and what they're willing to afford.
But are they, and we may be straying into politics here, Shreya, they seem to say one thing and then say something else, at the same time, where cutting taxes, but they're also actually putting up taxes. We heard the Chancellor say that to businesses. We know corporation taxes going up. They're saying that about national insurance contributions. They haven't really got their act together, have they?
No, and if you look at the recent spring statement, our analysis suggested that they gave 4 times as much support to richer households as poorer households. So they need to be taking a different distributional approach to their support, and they need to be doing more to target support at ordinary and low-income households.
OK, listen, we're joined very quickly now by Lizelle Bramall, who we hoped to talk to earlier. But, Lizelle, we had a few problems with your link. You're a hairdresser and a farmer. Nice mix. Just give us the view, economic view, quickly, if you can, from the field and the town.
Well, I'm a small business owner, and it's getting increasing harder and harder every week to make ends meet. Once your rent's going up, your petrol to get to work, your national insurance contributions are all going up. You've got pensions to pay, holiday pay, electricity going up, stocks increasing every week, weekly. And then there's a shortage of products as well. We have a lot of products from Italy, and they're just hard to get their hands.
That's quite a list. As I say, unfortunately, because of our communications issues, the time is limited. Give us one question for our panellists from your point of view, from I guess, from working on the high street.
Yeah, how do you get the high street back to its best? And when people have so much to pay out, how do you get people back on the streets?
That is a very, very good question, and I suppose it's also a post-pandemic question. Laura, your thoughts on that? How do you get people back into the town centres? And that is having a big economic effect, of course, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's a big issue in that if you've got this cost of living crunch and you've got people making a choice between heating and eating, as we've talked about, they're not going to be popping to the high street to wander around the shops and make some impulse purchases. They're not going to be going out to restaurants and bars. Those are the kind of easy cuts that people can make when they're looking at really rising bills. And so, I think that's difficult. One thing that the government could do is cut VAT, which it did during the pandemic. It cut VAT for hospitality businesses. Now, that did help a lot of businesses. Not a lot got passed on to consumers.
Listen, I'm sorry we're out of time. I'm so sorry. Laura Suter, Shreya Nanda, Lizelle Bramall, Michael Atwell-Bryce and Carly Newman, thank you all very much indeed. More coming up.